Again, I've spoken before of the lack of innovation which characterises those parts of the world where the majority of the inhabitants are of sub-Saharan ancestry, including, of course, the islands of the Caribbean. The excuse often advanced for the problems which these nations face, both economic and social, are that they suffered terribly as a result of colonialism and the slave trade, and that this damaged irreparably their future prospects and left them somehow crippled and unable to advance. It is broadly hinted that had we left Africa alone, then it would have industrialized of its own accord and reached great heights of sophistication, equaling or perhaps even exceeding that achieved in Europe. It is our fault that Africa is in such a state, and that is why we must give both Africa and the Caribbean a lot of money to make up for the harm we inflicted and the consequent lack of development in black nations. Why, if it were not for our baleful influence, then by now Nigeria and Jamaica might have been launching their own rockets into space and exploring the planets. I think it fair to say that for most of us, the idea of a Nigerian mission to space or a Jamaican spaceship visiting Mars is the stuff of fantasies and likely to cause an involuntary smile. I mean, the very idea is ridiculous, isn't it? But why? This points to a grave flaw in the accepted wisdom that we have caused terrible harm to black countries by colonialism and slavery, and that we have held back their development, crippled them, in fact. We can see what this flaw is by considering the question of launching satellites into orbit and sending probes to the moon and so on. India and Israel both suffered terribly from colonialism, not only from Britain, but in the case of Israel, it was under Turkish occupation as well for centuries. Later, the British also took over the place and ran it. Here are two parts of the world which were every bit as much victims of colonialism as any African nation. And yet, today, both nations have flourishing space programs. India has sent probes to land on the moon and orbit Mars, while Israel launches its own satellites routinely. Colonialism does not seem to have harmed the long-term prospects of either India or Israel. They are, of course, not the only places in Asia which send things into space. Iran, North Korea, and Japan also launch satellites, and China has sent men into orbit and is actively planning for a manned landing on the moon. Africa is extraordinarily rich in the natural resources which are in great demand throughout the world, from diamonds and gold in South Africa to the rare earth metals vital for our batteries and mobile telephones. Jamaica has some of the world's richest deposits of bauxite ore, from which aluminium is extracted. There does not seem to be anything preventing those nations from becoming prosperous and successful, developing into technologically advanced societies like Japan, South Korea, and so on. Look how wealthy and stable Singapore is, a city-state with literally no natural resources whatsoever. Here is a question for those who wish to blame all the ills of Africa on Europe's past actions. It is this: why did these actions not have a similar effect on India, Singapore, and so on? Why do those nations flourish while Africa fails miserably? I'm intrigued to hear what people think might be the true explanation for the fact that Africa is a basket case, while Asia is without doubt fated to lead the world in coming years.